Now we will look at a new small topic, participle. Now, what is a participle? A participle is a word which is partly a verb and partly an adjective. It's partly a verb and partly an adjective. And under this participle, we have three categories. We have present participle, past participle, and perfect participle. Present, past, and perfect. So participle is partly a verb and partly an adjective. Now when you go through the exercise, we will grasp and we will understand better. So, the participle. The participle. Now, I'll give you few sentences for you to understand. I saw Ram playing football. Let's look at that. I saw Ram playing. I saw Ram playing football. I saw Ram playing football. She told us an interesting story. Okay? She told us. She told us an interesting story. And then I have, hearing the noise, the boy woke up. Hearing the noise. Hearing the noise. Hearing the noise, the boy got up, or the baby got up. The boy got up. Now, we have three sentences here. So, we are doing the participle. What is a participle? A participle is a verb and partly an adjective. It's partly a verb and partly an adjective. Now, I have three sentences. Let's look at them. I saw Ram playing football. Participle is partly a verb. What's the verb here now? Playing. We have here one word, playing. I saw Ram playing football. She told us an interesting story. Interesting. She told us an interesting story. We said participle is partly a verb, partly an adjective. When you say here, story, what kind of story? Interesting story. So here it is like an adjective and here it's a verb. Hearing the noise. Hearing the noise. The boy got up. Hearing, that's a verb. So we are talking about participle being partly a verb and partly an adjective. Okay, so we say a participle. A participle is a word. Participle is a word which is partly a verb partly an adjective. And partly an adjective. That's very important for us to know. Partly a verb and partly an adjective. In the first one we have, I saw Ram playing. So here when you say playing, it's a verb. But here she told us an interesting story. Interesting comes as adjective, describing. What story? Boring story? Interesting story. So a participle is either it can be a verb or it can be an adjective. Now, let's look at these sentences very carefully. In these sentences, playing, interesting, and hearing. Let's look at the three words. Playing, interesting, and hearing. They are formed from the verbs play, interest, hear. So how are these words formed? From play, playing, interest, interesting, hear, and hearing it came. So we have three. These words, play, interest, hear. From these we have formed the verb playing, interesting, and hearing. They qualify the nouns. Now, they qualify the nouns football, story, and the boy. So we got the verb, and those verbs are qualifying what? Qualifying to playing. What kind? Football, interesting, story, hearing. Who is hearing? Who is listening to the boy? So qualifies the nouns ball, story, boy. There are three nouns here. Football, ball, story, boy. They're qualifying that. Okay. Now, they qualify the nouns football, story, boy, just as an adjective does. So we said playing is a verb, but because it is qualifying football, like an adjective, it also does the work of an adjective. Therefore, playing, interesting, and hearing have the characters both as a verb and as an adjective. Therefore, we say it's partly a verb and partly an adjective. Such words are called verbal adjectives or participles. So such words are called verbal adjectives or participles. So we say playing, interesting, playing, interesting, and hearing. Playing, interesting, hearing. We say such words are called verbal adjectives. Such words are called. Such words are called hearing, interesting, playing. Such words are called verbal adjectives. What we call verbal adjectives. Verbal adjectives or participles or participle. Okay, now we said playing, the verbs, playing, interesting, hearing, qualify the nouns, football, story, and the boy. Okay, so they say it is almost doing the work of a verb and an adjective. And therefore, such words like playing, interesting, and hearing, they are such words, we call them as verbal adjectives or participle. What is a participle? A participle is a word which is partly a verb, partly an adjective. So this type of words are called verbal adjectives. So playing, interesting, and hearing are verbal adjectives or participle because it does the work of a verb and acts like an adjective too. Okay. Now, in the participle, we have three categories. We say present participle, past participle, and perfect participle. So there are three kinds. Okay? We say we have three kinds of participles. Three kinds of participles. We have three kinds of participle. And the first one is, number one, we have, first is the present participle. First participle, the present participle. And the second one we have is past participle, the past participle. And then we have the third one is perfect, the perfect participle. So we have three different types of participle and each one will do it as we do, you will learn. So what is a participle now? A participle is a word which is partly a verb, partly an adjective. So it does the work of a verb and an adjective. Now we have three sentences. Playing, in that we have three verbs there. Playing, interesting, and hearing. But it does the work of a verb and acts like a adjective. Therefore we call them verbal adjectives. The verbal adjective or the name is participles. In the participle, we have three categories: present participle, the past participle, and the perfect participle. Each one, we will do it in detail for you to grasp, for you to understand through various exercises. The second category is the past participle. So let us look at the past participle. That's the second type. Past participle. The past participle ends in ed, t, d, and n. The past participle, it ends in ed, d, t, en, n, or and. Now, the past participle, it ends in ed, d, t, en, n, and. And it denotes the action that is completed. Is called part. So, action here is completed. So, it ends in these action. What about the action? We are talking about action is completed. Action is completed and therefore we call it the past participle. Why do we call it a past participle? Because action is completed. This you must remember. Action completed and the word ends in ed, t, d, en, n and and. Okay. Now we look at the example for us to understand better. Okay. Examples. A. Driven by hunger, she stole a piece of bread. Driven by hunger. Driven by hunger. Driven by hunger, she stole. She stole a piece of bread. A piece of bread. Driven by hunger. What are we talking about? We said the past participle ends in en. Driven. Okay? Driven by hunger, she stole a piece of bread. Another one. Mohan is liked by all, or Mona. Mona is liked, ed, we said ends in ed, by all. Okay? Liked by all. He is a retired officer. He is. He is a retired, ed, retired officer. He's a retired officer. Then, we saw the house burned to ashes. We saw the house. We saw the house burned. T, to ashes. We saw the house burned to ashes. We have done T. Then. Okay. Now let's look at the words here. Driven, liked, retired, burned. Let's look at those words. Now, the action here is completed. Hence, we say it's a past participle. Now, what is a past participle? A past participle, a past participle, A past participle is the third form of verb. Is the third form of the verb. A past participle, the third form of the verb. Drive, when you say drive, then you have drove. Then you have driven. So this is 1, 2, 3. A past participle is the third form of the verb. When you say drive, he drove the car, driven. Driven by hunger. Or we can say, we saw a car driven at full speed. Somebody was driving at the driven. The word driven is used. That's the third form. Here, when you say here, liked, retired, burnt. Okay, so past participle is a third, we use the third form of verb. Okay, now we have done first, present participle, past. Next we go into the perfect participle. Now it's very easy to remember the past participle. We have used the third form, the last form of the verb in all this. Okay? So, and the action is completed. The past participle words end in en, ed, t, d, n, or and. Ending. And here the action is completed. And what form of verb we use here? The last form. The last form. The present participle, we use the last form of word. For example, drive. He drove, driven. The last form. So the past participle is action complete and it's very easy. Now we go into the third form, the perfect participle. And that's what we are going to do in the next.